We're ready.
All right.
Okay, I'm going to call the meeting to order. We begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. If you would like to join us, please stand. Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So, thank you all for coming. Commissioner Arnold is at a conference and so will not be joining us today. Okay, first item on our agenda is to adopt the agenda.
Madam President, is this where we move things from the agenda?
No.
Okay. Second.
Okay, so it's been moved and seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries unanimously. Okay, the next item is the consent agenda, and items on this agenda are considered to be routine and will be enacted by one motion. There will be no separate discussion on these items unless a commissioner or citizen so requests, in which case the item will be removed and placed on the regular agenda. All consent agenda items are commission action items unless noted. Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to move something? If not, Mr. Hanson?
Yeah, I would move to approve the consent agenda, but we will move item 2 from consent to the regular agenda, making it item 6. And do we need to move the regular agenda item 3 off at this point?
No,
or-
we'll do it, we'll deal with it
Okay,
when we get
so
there.
that's the motion.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. All right, this brings us to our regular agenda. These are all action items. The first is the Dos Callister subdivision. We'll hear a staff report from Don Battles. This is to appeal a staff level decision and request a waiver of policy. Oh, before we begin that, I just wanted to point out, we do have a councilwoman from the city of Eagle. Miranda Gold is here, so welcome and thank you for coming. Okay, Dawn.
Madam President, Commissioners, for the record, I'm Dawn Battles, Development Services. This application for a 6-lot preliminary plat was on the regular agenda on October 3rd, 2018 as an appeal of a staff level decision. After listening to testimony, the ACHD Commission deferred the application so staff could continue to work with the City of Eagle to determine if the current street typology on the master street map is compatible with the City of Eagle's future land use plan and with the county's current large lot rural developments. The applicant is requesting approval from Ada County Development Services for a plat located on Brookside Lane north of Highway 55. This site is located within Eagle's area of impact. Dos Callister is proposed as a 6-lot residential subdivision on 34 acres. This site has approximately 1,100 feet of frontage on Brookside Lane. Brookside Lane is classified as a collector and designated as a residential collector street on the master street map in 2009. Brookside Lane was classified as a collector in 2007 on the City of Eagle's Foothills Subarea Plan and was also included in the ACHD Northwest Foothills Transportation Plan. Brookside Lane is designated as a residential collector typology on the MSM, which is a suburban urban section with curb gutter and sidewalk, which is not compatible with large lot developments of 5 acres or greater. The frontage improvement requirements for a residential collector include the construction of Brookside Lane as half of a 36-foot street section with pavement widening, vertical curb, gutter, and sidewalk abutting the site. Staff recommends, along with the support from the City of Eagle, that as an interim improvement for large lot subdivisions on Brookside Lane, that Brookside Lane be improved as a rural road section with 12-foot wide travel lanes, 8-foot wide paved shoulders, and a borrow ditch abutting the site as depicted in the Livable Streets Design Guide. Staff and the City of Eagle do not recommend changing the overall typology or classification of the roadway based on the approved comprehensive plan and the Northwest Foothills Plan. Staff recommends that Brookside Lane be improved in the interim as a rural road section abutting the site. The applicant is in agreement with the modification conditions of approval. I will stand for any questions.
Are there any questions of staff?
I just have a question. Yes, Brookside Court, this didn't come up last time, but I noted that Brookside Court just is is a dead-end street. Was there consideration of treating that as a private road rather than a public road, given the concern that we currently have over the number of cul-de-sacs and dead-end roads that the public maintains?
President Baker, Commissioner Hanson, no, there was no discussion about Brookside Court.
Any further questions? Okay, is the applicant here? Want to come up? Did you want to make a comment? Give your name and address for the record, please.
Dave Colister, 2873 West Wind Drive in Eagle. The application proposes Brookside Court to be private road.
Oh, Brookside will be private.
That's what the application states.
Oh.
just to let you know.
Okay.
We're in complete agreement with staff's recommendation.
That's good. That was the only concern I had is,
Yeah, no, it's a good concern. That was the staff's recommendation at the time, and we accepted it, and that's what our proposal is.
okay, I guess the question wasn't clear.
On? Is that microphone on?
I don't know.
Okay, maybe it is. Maybe you need to just
I'm just
bring
not
it up.
close enough to it.
Right, okay.
Anyway, I don't have any other comments unless there's any questions.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to testify on this? All right, Commission, you have it before you.
Madam President, I move approval of the Dallas Callister subdivision, I guess the staff decision that provides an interim treatment for Brookside Lane.
Is there a second?
I'll second that, knowing that Brookside Court is going to be a private lane, which means that the public isn't obligated to maintain it for these handful of homes.
I'll just, if you don't mind, just a comment, discussion. I think that when we heard this, I think that the staff and the city of Eagle, I want to thank the city of Eagle. I think this is the right decision. We've got a lot of large lots there, so this is consistent with that. And then in the future, if those large lots get redeveloped into more dense housing, then obviously curb, gutter, sidewalk, that makes a lot of sense. But this is a good interim solution, and I appreciate the staff and the city of Eagle working to come up with that.
Any other discussion? Okay, I'm not going to vote for the motion because I believe that it still is classified as a collector. It will be a collector. If the lots develop, there's no guarantee they're going to develop all in a row. So we could end up with a patchwork of a little bit of curb, gutter, and sidewalk, then nothing, then something. And basically it'll put a burden on the community in the future, the tax base, the taxpayers who really are not involved with this subdivision. And that's going to happen someday. It may not be today, it may not be tomorrow, but as we can see in the city of Boise, all the large lots are developing and they're getting more and more dense, as will this in the future. And I just don't want to put the burden on future taxpayers. I think the developer should be responsible for putting the curb, gutter, and sidewalk in now. Even though it's just a small part of the whole, eventually it's going to be necessary, so I am not going to vote for this. Is there any further discussion? Okay, all in favor say aye.
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 Okay, opposed? No. So the clerk will record that vote. All right. Next item on the agenda is resolution number 2246 and resolution 2249, which is vacation of public right-of-way at North Harding Street. This is a public hearing. I'm going to open the public hearing and we'll hear a staff report from Dave Serdar for both resolutions. Will you need two separate motions on this?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
For the record, David Serdar, right-of-way supervisor, ACHD. This is a public hearing to vacate public alley right-of-way known as Harding Street. As just noted, this will be one presentation, but two resolutions and motions. ACHD received an application from the Vickers and Passmores regarding the right-of-way adjacent to property they own. The vacation area is approximately 0.131 acres. ACHD will receive a total of $55,628 for the vacation. This vacation was originally the whole alley, but Boise City requested that a small area be left in ACHD ownership for a potential future trail. At the request of ACHD right away, Boise City and the applicants worked out the potential trail location with the Vickers and the Passmores. ACHD asked for this because staff did not feel the added cost of preparing new legal descriptions for the trail should be borne by the applicants. The vicinity map shows the location in relation to Irving Street, right there, and Harding Street, which is right there. The Passmore vacation area is depicted in yellow, and the Vickers area is depicted in red. Here's a more close-up view of the site. The Passmore vacation is 2,792 square feet, and the Vickers vacation is 2,914 square feet. It is staff recommendation that the vacation be approved and the commission adopt and sign resolution numbers 2246 and 2249, authorizing the proposed vacation of public alley right-of-way. Once again, as a reminder, this will be done in 2 motions and 2 resolutions. I will remain standing for any questions.
Are there any questions of staff? Okay, this is a public hearing. Is there anyone who wishes to testify on this item? Okay, then I will close the public hearing, and Commission, we need a resolution, a motion on resolution number 2246.
Madam President, I would move to adopt resolution 2246, finding that the public right-of-way, that there's no longer a public interest in retaining the public right-of-way described therein.
Second.
Okay, any further discussion? Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. Okay, now we need a motion on resolution 2249.
Madam President, I would move to adopt resolution 2249, making a finding that the public right-of-way, there's no longer a public interest in the public right-of-way described therein.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
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 Okay, motion carries unanimously. All right, the next item on our agenda is resolution 2259, surplus property request for approval, declaring that surplus property of a sidecast sweeper is no longer necessary or useful to ACHD. We have received a request to defer this until December 5th. Is there a motion to that effect?
Madam President, I move that we defer resolution 2259 until December 5th, 2018.
Second.
Okay, is there any discussion? Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Any opposed? No. Okay, so motion carries unanimously. Sorry, I lost it there for a minute. Jeez, okay. All right, next item on our agenda is ordinance 231A, amendments to the capital improvements plan and impact fee ordinance, request for adoption. This is a public hearing. I will open the public hearing and we'll receive a report from Mitch Skiles. Do we have anybody signed up to testify on this? We haven't received any. Okay, great, thank you. All right, Mitch, you want to go ahead and give us a
Like we
staff
do.
report? Thank you, that's it.
3-1.
That's
Thanks.
all right.
President Baker, members of the commission, excuse me. I'm Mitch Skiles, and I'm going to be presenting on the proposed amendments to the 2016 Capital Improvements Plan.
And you might want to speak up just a little.
And Impact Fee Ordinance 231A. A general overview of the presentation. I'll start by giving talking briefly about the Capital Improvements Plan. Go over some of the changes to the trip generation manual. Talk briefly about some local data for self-storage, trip factors. Discuss signals and roundabouts within CIP road segments, give a cost overview, and overview of some policy amendments. The Capital Improvements Plan, or CIP, the current adopted version is the 2016 CIP, was adopted in August 24th, 2016. Was developed in accordance with the State Development Impact Fee Act. The proposed amendments have been approved by the CICAC, or the Capital Investment Citizens Advisory Committee. Since the last adoption of the CIP and impact fee ordinance, the 10th edition of ITE's Trip Generation Manual came out in September of 2017. There were several changes with this update. It removed studies prior to 1980. Previously, there were studies in the Trip Generation Manual from dating back to the 60s. Some new land uses were added, some were reclassified. The proposed impact fee schedule reflects the 10th edition trip generation rates. Previously, we were using the 9th edition. This allows for more accurate assessment of impact fees with the updated and more current data. Over the past several years, we have received data from gate records for self-storage facilities that warrant a lower rate per development unit for these types of facilities. So we're proposing that we use that local data in our fee schedule. This amendment would be a new item to the CIP, proposing to add some signals or roundabouts at arterial collector intersections within CIP road segments. These would be proposed as impact fee eligible costs and would add $14 million in impact fee eligible project costs to the CIP over the 20-year period. This allows development to pay for the necessary intersection improvements and is a funding mechanism for constructing these intersections when warranted. As a cost overview that you can see on the screen, this would add $14 million to impact fee eligible costs and ultimately to the total CIP costs, which changes the VMT cost, which goes into the impact fee calculation. Proposed policy amendments. Our impact fee ordinance is section 7300 of our policy manual. We're proposing removing section 7307, which currently requires the commission to allocate 10% of impact fee eligible costs out of property tax revenue. This maximizes the use of impact fees on CIP projects. Also proposing we revise section 7313 to include noticing requirements for adopting overlay fees. The proposed effective date is January 1 of 2019. So with that, the staff recommendation is to approve and concurrently adopt amendments to the 2016 CIP and impact fee ordinance 231A. Adoption does require a supermajority vote of the commission. And with that, I'll stand for questions.
Are there any questions of staff? Mr. Hanson?
Yeah, thanks, Mitch. The question I had, which relates to as we were evaluating impact fee eligible projects, and now we can would include roundabouts and some treatments that signalize intersections. A significant impact fee eligible component, which was taken out a number of years ago, which, if you look at it across the county, means that we don't cover them with impact fees anymore, is collectors that we continue to limit. Was there any discussion as you were updating this portion of the ordinance as to whether and how we can return to covering collectors? Because as we've seen, there's a lot of collectors that have to be built that and yet we don't use the impact fee, and as a part of it is we're only doing it for arterials.
President Baker, Commissioner Hanson, there was not discussion as part of this interim update related to adding collectors to the CIP. That would require us to show a need through more of a sophisticated modeling effort for those collectors. So as part of just this interim update, we did not consider or discuss that.
Thanks. Well, I can assure you, I'm definitely not sophisticated, let alone understand sophisticated modeling. But there's definitely a need, a huge need. A lot of collectors have had to be built with this growth, and we ought to be covering them, or impacts to collectors, especially moving rural roads to collector roads and so forth. Thank you.
Well,
Just a
Mr.
comment.
Skiles, will there be an update that would include collectors in the future at some point?
Our proposed update will come likely in 2020, following Compass's Communities in Motion 2.0. They have planned adoption in December. It would be under consideration at that time.
So you'll be working on it as of January 1, basically.
Yeah, that's when we'll kind of start the process of updating for the next formal CIP update.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions? Okay, this is a public hearing. Is there anyone here who wishes to testify? Anyone? Oh, okay, come on up and give your name and address for the record.
Hi, my name is Betty Berman Solo. I live at 1970 Cannon Way. And I just wanted to comment that the sooner the better. I was under the impression that the impact fee followed collectors as well as arterials. And from my vantage point, living in the Southwest, if there's any way that a review that entailed more sophisticated look at incorporating the collector fee, the collectors as well as the arterials, before something that puts us, maybe 2 years down the road before it's implemented. I'm not certain when that might be, but if there's any way that the commission or the director or staff knows to get that expedited, I certainly would be in favor of it. I think it's a tremendous loss without those fees being incorporated. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, as the staff pointed out, it requires the approval of the Communities in Motion 2.0, which isn't going to happen till December at the board meeting. But I think it's December, 15, 16, 17, something like that. And then that then sets this whole process in motion. And apparently it's quite complicated, so it would be unlikely it could be moved forward that quickly, but I'm sure the staff will do it with all dispatch.
Yeah. Well, Commissioner Baker, I would appreciate it. I think it's a tremendous help and maybe an oversight that hopefully can be remedied in some way.
Well, let me ask this, are you in favor of the amendments to the interim plan?
Interim plan, yes.
Okay, thank you. Hi, is there anyone else who wishes to testify? Okay,
I just, Commissioner Baker, I guess just a question for staff, if I could. I support the interim improvements here. Some of the comments that have been made, that I've read, relate to like collectors. The way the capital improvement plan works is we identify the needs and we identify the configuration, we assign a cost to that, that rolls up into the impact fee. So if we're gonna identify these improvements on collectors, I'm trying to understand, how one would go about that. I guess that's for a future staff and commission to understand. One of the comments that I think is interesting is like safety improvements, right? Trying to forecast what pedestrian improvements might be needed, you know, as the volume of traffic goes. I mean, that's an interesting, you know, endeavor to undertake. You know, assign out the cost for a hawk, build that into the impact fee program. You know, I think that's worth, you know, considering. I don't think that's gonna be a huge, you know, cost, but, in terms of adding, you know, most collectors get built, you know, with development. And I'm trying to understand this huge need for collectors, you know, that has somehow been an oversight in this CIP program. I'm not able to get my mind around where that would be. So do you have any response to that?
President Baker, Commissioner Woods, I guess generally speaking, the CIP by statute has to show a need for any improvements that we show in the plan. So we have to show some sort of deficiency.
Bingo.
As far as collectors go, I mentioned a modeling effort. That modeling effort is fairly standard in our CIP process. We would need to include collectors in that analysis and see if we can demonstrate future deficiencies for those with the data that we have. Also, just to comment on the pedestrian component, that's something that I believe ITE is taking steps in that direction. However, they're not there yet. They're starting to collect some data on person trips rather than just vehicle trips, which could potentially help us show need for other types of improvements.
Well, I appreciate that response. I would just encourage you to continue to be on the front edge of that. I think that it's not necessarily person trips, but as the volume of traffic goes up, you know, you look at the type of pedestrian crossing that may be needed with increased vehicular traffic. You know, that's where we get into the hawks and the pedestrian hybrid beacons, and so it would be appropriate to have new growth help pay for those improvements, in my opinion. But that's a step two, I guess, in this process.
And Mr. Woods, I can see the necessity for including collectors in the future. You know, in a green field, the collector tends to get built by the developer, but in sort of hopscotch development, there probably are places where it needs to be filled in. And I think that's where the use of the impact fees for collectors would come in. So Commissioner Goldthorpe has a question. As funds become available from development, can the, for example, Cloverdale expansion designated on page 75 be brought forward and constructed prior to time designated? And what is the mechanism for that to happen? Is this south of the freeway? So this would be like the Cloverdale expansion south of the freeway, probably south of Victory?
President Baker, Commissioner Goldthorpe, it depends if that road segment is in if it's, my understanding is that if it's adopted that way in the 5-year plan, then, I mean, however it's adopted in the 5-year plan would be how it's funded.
So if it's funded in the 5-year plan, it can be, say it's in the plan for 2024, if the money's available, it could be done in 2022. I think that's what his question is, right? Yeah. And it's, and the mechanism would be, the commission would decide that.
Madam
That
President,
true?
Commissioner Golder, yes, the capital improvements plan lays out general timeframes in 5-year increments. If priorities change and the commission adopts a different priority and an updated integrated 5-year work plan, it can be built whenever you designate in that plan. The CIP doesn't bind you to a timeframe.
Is that, okay. All right, any other further questions for staff? Okay, then I'm gonna go ahead and close the public hearing.
Madam President, I move that we approve ordinance 231A.
Is there a second? Okay, there's a second. Is there any discussion?
So I have a couple of concerns. It's just, and I'm prepared to vote to approve this. But it's a little like saying, here's this building. Remember when we passed it, we built it? As you probably recall, I voted against the CIP back in August of 2016. Because there's some pretty serious remodeling that has to take place. Well, there's a little kind of remodeling that's happened in this interim, which begs the question, we aren't waiting until 2020 to make these changes. I think they're justified. But every time you do look at the whole structure, you do see the other flaws. And I think the big flaw, Commissioner Woods has pointed out, is that as we project out need, we build for car traffic. We know that safety improvements are going to be necessary, but we tend to wait until development comes to pay for that. And but the way in which we've defined deficiency is way too narrow. I think that the ordinance should go to the maximum extent allowed by state law, because our metrics don't use those. We don't use those metrics to say there's a deficiency with respect to other forms of mobility. So we only project out what the deficiency is with respect to automobiles. These are minor changes. These are important. The other thing is we do a lot of capital expenditure. We spend a lot for capital improvements, and yet this is the only plan we call capital improvements. I'll rest and pause and say, okay, well, let's deal with collectors and projecting out the need for pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure and getting that paid for in advance of development. I'm fine with that. If you're willing to, at least from now on, refer to this rather than the capital improvement plan as a roadway and intersection expansion plan, because that's what it is. I mean, it's an honest, neutral way of describing. This is a roadway and intersection expansion plan. So I will support the motion if we can, from now on, just simply refer to the plan as the roadway and intersection expansion plan. You can still do capital improvements if you have a statutory obligation to say, in parentheses, the capital improvements plan, so that it doesn't make someone nervous. But for all intents and purposes, when I go and talk to people and say, we're gonna make capital improvements in this crosswalk or in this drainage, technically they're not capital improvements under the capital improvements plan. So I would like this to be called the roadway and intersection expansion plan, capital improvements plan. Any problem with that, maker of the motion?
I'm happy to do that over the next 2 months, Commissioner Hanson.
Thank you.
Okay, any other discussion? Well, I'm going to support it. I think this is a good step towards maximizing the revenues from the development community. I know they probably don't want to hear that, but I think it's important that, you know, as newcomers come in, as new houses are built, that they pay their share of the deficiencies that are inherent in the system and not leave it to the rest of the taxpayers to pick up the slack. So with that, I will call for the vote. All in favor of adopting ordinance 231A, say aye.
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 Opposed? Did you? Okay. Opposed? Motion carries unanimously with 4 votes. All right. Next up is ordinance 238, amending ACHD policy sections 7100 and 7200. This is a request for adoption. It's a public hearing. I will open the public hearing. This is for policy revisions to sections 7100 and 7200 related to level of service planning thresholds, requirements, and procedures related to the level of service planning thresholds and mitigation requirements, and various technical edits. We'll hear a staff report from Gary Inselman, and then we will throw it open for public comment. Mr. Inselman.
Madam President, thank you. As you said, this is a public hearing for ordinance 238. Gary Inselman, Development Services Manager, for the record. Proposed policy revisions amends portions of section 7100 and 7200 in our development policy manual. And the revisions are related to level of service policies and alternatives for mitigation requirements. We also included a few cleanup items, updating our website address, and some section references, among others. The substantive changes do amend referencing level of service standards and replacing that with level of service planning thresholds. Amends requirements and procedures relating to those planning thresholds, and amends requirements and procedures related to mitigation measures required. To begin, I'd just like to point out that level of service, it's not a safety measure, and it's not the capacity of the roadway. Capacity is a precise measure. A precise measure of capacity and level of service requires an individual assessment of each road segment. That is not possible when we're looking at the 20-year plans. So we do establish planning thresholds. Each individual road segment, if you look at the capacity, requires a detailed analysis of that road segment and the number of intersections, lanes, access control, etc. Our planning thresholds are established for each classification of roadway, collectors, minor arterials, principal arterials, and they're used to determine when widening should be considered. It does not mean once a road segment reaches that threshold that it has to be widened, just that it's time for us to consider it and look at it in greater detail. These are our currently adopted level of service standards and goals. It is the commission intent to maintain an average of 85% or better on principal arterials, and we believe we're currently at 92%. As you know, we have adopted a master street map. We use that as our guiding document, identifying future lane configurations of the arterial roadways. Once a roadway has been built to that maximum lane configuration, it is not considered for future widening. And ACHD and the land use agencies have mutually agreed to accept a higher level of congestion on corridors that are constrained by the master street map. From the 2016 capital improvements plan, this is the projected
The
road
what
segments. Our statutorily required capital improvements plan for our roadway and intersection widening.
It'll take
So these road
practice.
segments would be projected to reach our planning threshold by 2035 and would be constrained by the currently adopted master street map and would not be considered for additional widening. So our current development policy, our traffic impact studies are required to analyze roadways and intersections where the site traffic is 10% or greater of the downstream traffic. If a development is impacting a corridor that's constrained by the master street map, meaning it's been built to its maximum configuration, then no mitigation would be required. If it's not on a corridor that's been constrained by the master street map, it's not been built out to that maximum configuration, then they would be required to mitigate per the TIS policy. And they must provide alternatives for feasible mitigation, meaning that it's possible for that mitigation to actually be constructed, and that is as determined by ACHD, not the applicant. They do have the option of restricting their phasing until improvements are constructed by others or ACHD, or as we've seen in a few cases, they can request a waiver of policy for reasons that they will present. Under the proposed revisions, we are recommending to clarify that since they're not required to study traffic less than 10%, if their site traffic's less than 10% of the downstream traffic, that we clarify that there would be no mitigation required if they are less than 10% of the downstream traffic. As an example, last year, we had a small infill project on State Street, would have added 9 vehicle trips in the peak hour, when State Street carries more than 2,000 trips in the peak hour, and that project was required to go through the process of requesting a waiver since there was no feasible mitigation for them to widen State Street. These proposed revisions would make it less onerous for small infill projects like this. If there's no feasible mitigation possible for the proposed development, and the construction is funded in an integrated 5-year work plan or CIP, we're proposing no mitigation to be required. In that case, their impact fees would be the mitigation. If there's no feasible mitigation and it's not in the integrated 5-year work plan or CIP, or the construction isn't funded in those plans, then the developer may analyze the shoulder hour, which should generally be 4 p.m. to 5 p.m., and provide a safety analysis, again, or restrict phasing until improvements are constructed. This additional study and investment in the development area, no projects programmed in integrated 5-year plan or CIP. So this analysis of the shoulder hour would recognize that sometimes that level of service threshold is met for a short duration during the peak hour and not necessarily for a longer period of time, and could provide useful alternative mitigation measures with the development. So under the proposed revisions, if that shoulder hour level of service was okay, they could provide or suggest feasible mitigation other than the arterial roadway widening. This can include connecting missing pieces of sidewalk, bike facilities, local street connectivity, whatever may be possible within the area. We're recommending an area within 1.5 miles of the development, as that is the standard school walk radius. If the shoulder hour exceeds the thresholds, or there's no feasible non-roadway widening mitigation, then another alternative proposed would be for the applicant to request to enter into a development agreement with ACHD and offer to pay into the Priority Corridor Fund, which could help fund system improvements on the corridors identified by the commission and as priority corridors. Again, or they could restrict phasing until the improvements are constructed by others, or ACHD as always. So in summary, our current traffic impact study and mitigation requirements remain in place. The proposed revisions would provide additional alternatives when the traditional mitigation measures such as roadway widening and intersection improvements are not feasible, and it would support infill development. And with that, staff does recommend the commission adopt ordinance 238. And again, we will require a supermajority vote. And stand for any questions.
Are there any questions of staff? Mr. Hanson?
I have a question. If you could go 2 slides back, if you wouldn't mind. So, Gary, under the potential mitigation, is mitigation including sidewalks and bike facilities and connectivity, but we don't have any level of service goals for sidewalks and bike facilities. We don't have any of those other things. So how do we know that it actually mitigates the level of service for cars? In other words, you come back and say, okay, here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna build this bike facility, or we're gonna build these sidewalks, and that's what we'll do instead of some widening somewhere. But in fact, that we don't have a way of measuring whether that in fact would be an effective sidewalk. People would use it, it would be safe, it would be a functional versus a sidewalk that would be. So since we don't measure, how can we really use that as a mitigation strategy under this?
President Baker, Commissioner Hanson, if there's no sidewalks in the area and it's possible for them to build a sidewalk that would lead to a pedestrian attractor, then, and they build it to our standards, meaning in the correct location, or our engineering standards so that it is safe, then we would suggest that then that would be a useful improvement in the area. There's no, we're not saying that it would mitigate the traffic impact, because we're already determined through the process that there's no feasible mitigation for them to improve the arterial roadway or intersection. So now we're looking at other useful mitigation that they can provide for other users or the area in general that would help benefit the area and, you know, help mitigate their impacts to some extent, not necessarily the traffic level of service. Because in this scenario, they've looked at the shoulder hour and that's okay. So we're accepting that in the peak hour for that short duration, it would exceed our thresholds, but in the shoulder hour, it's okay. And then with that, it would be acceptable for them to show through their additional study and safety analysis what other useful mitigation might be possible.
You answered my question.
Any further questions?
Not at this time.
All right, this is a public hearing. We have one person signed up to testify, Dan Thompson. If you'd like to come up, give your name and address for the record.
Good afternoon. My name is Dan Thompson with Thompson Engineers. Business address is 181 East 50th Street in Garden City. I'm here in support of the measure today. My firm prepares traffic impact studies, and I've literally prepared hundreds of them over the last several years for all agencies throughout the state. And one thing we do have with ACHD is we know what we have to do and what we're expecting from them. And a lot of other agencies, can be very unknown because they don't have a good policy. And we've had the opportunity to have a good policy with ACHD. This amendment makes it better. Some of the clarification using level of service on a segment really hasn't been very clear. I don't think it adequately described the capacity of that roadway, and that's what everybody would seem to be hanging up on. The other great thing about this is it gives us some opportunities to provide some mitigation to the transportation system, not just to the transportation roads and intersections, and that benefits the system for there. Basically, we do support the system. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Thank you. Does anyone else wish to testify? Come on up, give your name and address for the record.
My name is Marissa Keith at 3279 South Cloverdale. I'm with the Southwest Data County Alliance. I just had some questions. I know that you all cannot answer these questions, but hopefully they will be answered before the vote. I was just curious for the reason behind the name change of level of service standard to level of service threshold. What will that do as far as affecting decisions that ACHD makes in the way of waivers or condemnations or road widening decisions, anything like that, if there will be any effect, and what the reason behind that was. And then as far as level of service, I know there's some disagreement between my organization and the commission as to what that means, but kind of talking a little bit about what Commissioner Woods said at the pre-session. When a recommendation is made for approval by ACHD, the wording to the land use agency seems to be exactly the same if the road is a level of service A or if it is a level of service F. And I think there needs to be some thought in how that can be differentiated, if it requires a little bit more forceful language or a longer recommendation, something to get the point across that it's not just everything's okay. This road is exactly as good as the road that is down the street. So there needs to be some sort of stronger language in that. And then my concern, and I may be misunderstanding this or this section of the policy, the 7205.3.1, and I did send this to a few engineers and some other people to have them look it over, and they read it kind of the same way that I did, was that take Savannah, which did not require a traffic impact study, and only added 66 cars or something at the peak hour, and that might even been per day, I can't remember, but does that standard mean that they will not be required to do any mitigation? Because out in Southwest Boise, where we see these 5 and 10 acre parcels develop, and they don't meet that requirement for a traffic impact study, if none of those developers will be required to do mitigation, it's not going to be a good situation for my community. So those were the concerns that I had. I think there's not a lot of differences between this policy and the one that we saw back in July. A few baby steps, which is good to see, but I think there could be a little bit more done to it, and a little bit more community outreach as far as sending this out for comment by neighborhood associations and other people who might be interested in it. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions?
If I could, thank you for taking the time to send us a very long and well-written comment, and for taking the time to come here today. I think I'd like to try to maybe address comments and either clear up or compound any misunderstandings you might have that I also have. But like when, I think what we're saying is that we have a countywide impact fee, which corresponds to our capital improvement plan, or whatever Jim said we're calling it now. So, you know,
Arterial roadway and an intersection expansion plan.
there you
Well,
go.
Mr. Hanson, it's different than what you said. You said roadway and intersection.
Roadway intersection expansion plan, yeah, but technically it's just arterials.
We're off on a rabbit trail already.
Yes.
So, anyway, so when people say, well, you know, how are you mitigating the impact of that development? Well, you're mitigating it by paying your impact fee, which goes to implement this 20-year capital improvement plan. And so you're not alone when you say, well, how come those funds aren't being used right here where the development is? And that's the way we used to do it. It used to be a project by project exaction process that was, you know, pretty painful, and the district went away from that. So what this is saying is that the impacts of the development is being mitigated through the payment of an impact fee. But if you're also on a road that's at level of service F, you're gonna need to do more than just pay that impact fee. You're gonna have to do these things, which is what, you know, this revision is trying to do, is clarify what, you know, those things are. That being said, that doesn't mean it's a good idea. The land use agency needs to make the decision as to whether or not the timing of this is right, you know, in accordance with their comprehensive plan. Because in a 20-year capital improvement plan, that means that you're gonna have potentially 19 years where the improvements, you know, aren't made. And is that, you know, acceptable or not? The district can't just fan out and do everything, you know, all over the place. We try as best we can to be focused there, but we need the land use partners to be able to read our reports and understand, you know, what we're saying too. So this isn't trying to give any of the development a pass. I think it's trying to clarify, you know, how when a development comes on a roadway that's at level of service F, how it's supposed to be treated. And hopefully it adds some clarification there so that people can say, but I don't want anyone to take away that as a result of that, we're suggesting that the land use agency approve it, and it's a good idea. That's what they've got to make a decision on and decide. Just wanted to respond to that.
And Gary, if you could respond to the question of what's the difference between level of service threshold from level of service standard? And then also, what's the standard requiring mitigation if it's, you know, so small that it doesn't need mitigation? I mean, she was referencing Savannah. Since they didn't have to do a traffic impact study, how do you determine mitigation, I guess was your question. So, if you could answer that.
President Baker, the difference in the terminology won't impact our decision-making process. We're trying to make it a little more clear for the public. The word standard made it sound like it was a definitive line in the sand you couldn't cross, which it is not. It's a planning threshold. It's not the exact capacity of each road segment of that classification. It's a threshold, like I said in my presentation, that we use to look at when a roadway segment should be considered for widening. It doesn't mean it has to be widened. So that, the terminology isn't going to change your decision-making process, I don't believe, or what our recommendations to you. As far as the smaller developments, as it's written, if a development came in that otherwise didn't require a traffic study to be performed and it was less than 10% of the downstream traffic, it would not be required to make any additional mitigation off-site. They would still have their standard requirements. If they generate enough traffic to warrant a turn lane at their entrance, they'd still have to do their sidewalk improvements. But it doesn't mean that we couldn't require, as it would if this amendment were adopted, we can still require a traffic impact study even if it doesn't meet those general thresholds. Our policy allows us to do that on any development if there's a reason for it. And then we could look at additional mitigation if as necessary, depending on those site-specific conditions and characteristics.
So that is existing now and that would exist in the future.
That is correct.
So is that helpful?
So, like in the case of, like Savannah, where the developer had to add sidewalk off-site, that would not happen in the future, or that
sorry, what?
would that not happen in the future then, or would that have to have a traffic impact study to enforce that?
Madam President, to connect sidewalks, we don't need a traffic impact study, and whether we ask the developer to do it or we commonly will do that even out of our own funds with the developer cooperative budget item that you give us each year to make connections on short segments like that when it's deemed appropriate and necessary for an area. So there's multiple ways that we could get connections of sidewalks or other types of things done if it's possible with the specific sites, and we look for those opportunities.
Is that helpful? Does that answer your question?
Kind of, but I think it just needs to be clearer, and if that is the intent in the policy, it needs to be more clear, because that's not how I read it. That's not how 3 other people who know a whole lot more about this than I do read it. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Goldthorpe has a question for Gary.
Okay.
So Commissioner Goldthorpe can't speak because he's having surgery, and although I think the commission voted that I was the one who's supposed to have surgery, so I can't speak. He's asking, are we going to allow for GIS-based impact studies? Why or why not? Traffic impact studies. I think. Yeah, traffic impact.
President Baker, Commissioner Goldthorpe, I'm not clear on what you mean by that.
GIS, do you do impact studies using GIS technology? Is that how?
The
We
traffic
don't
impact
do-
studies are,
We don't do the traffic impact study, right?
Right,
The
the
developer
developer
does the
does.
traffic
the developer
impact
does
study.
that, and they begin with a compass model run to show their area of influence. And then they have a pre-meeting with our staff to review the extents of the traffic impact study and which specific intersections and road segments and areas of concern that should be addressed in the study.
Does that answer your question?
Did that answer your question? No? Do you want to write something more that we could ask him? Okay.
Anyone else?
Is there anyone else who wishes to testify? Okay, come on up. Give your name and address for the record.
Deanna Smith, 910 Main Street, Boise, Idaho, 83702. I appreciate some of the improvements here, the way we're looking at how to use the tool of LOS. I really like this effort to incentivize small infill. I would encourage the staff to continue to look for ways to incentivize land use decisions that support the community's emotion and frankly de-incentivize land use that does not. I think there are more opportunities here, which is not to say this should stop your decision today, but continue to work at this tool. The other thing that I see that I really appreciate is this effort to think differently about road widening and that it's not just a standard that we automatically do. I like the language of moving from a standard to a planning threshold. However, that as well, I think would be useful to build in, not just that you don't always have to consider it, but what other factors. Commissioner Hanson brought up the fact that you don't have LOS for biking and walking, which some communities do. We don't really have too many standards at all, and to look harder at not only, why you might not widen it in a particular situation or a particular project. Looking at safety, looking at your roadways to bikeways master plan, other walking and biking demands, connectivities, what do you have there in terms of transit, and just kind of looking at all the other infrastructure and consider also what reasons should be looked at for not widening, for ensuring safety and mobility along that corridor. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
I have
Any
a-
questions?
I have a question.
Commissioner
for
Woods?
Deanna. So, I'm just curious, I mean, I understand the concept of incentivizing land use that supports community in motion and coming up with disincentives for projects that don't support, but I just don't know what those are. I mean, I look at the West Ada School District and that high school decision, and it was out in the middle of nowhere where Meridian hadn't been doing development, and now we got a high school out there. I mean, what would we offer as a disincentive? Like, how would that work?
Well, I think ultimately the disincentive comes more through the incentives and trying to incentivize what you want, and then it makes it more difficult. So causing those who are going to build something that doesn't fulfill community's emotion, doesn't fulfill some of your other goals, and I think you need to look at your impact fee long-term and figure out how to use that tool better. We have at times historically used it. And I know you have to be careful legally, so I'm not the person to tell you exactly how, but I think encouraging the staff to look at that, to continue down this road and think about, I think the question from the previous speaker, we use the example of small infill project, but what's a what's infill? What's a 9 unit development inside of some fairly already existing densely built place versus out is it a greenfield? Is it still infill just because it's, so I think more definition to your land uses, and then some other questions, is it a significant land use change? Would be another question you could look at. And if it's a significant land use change, maybe it's only 10 units, but because it's a significant land use change, you require the impact study. Those are some of the questions I think you could take a look at.
Well, thank you. Although, if we can't really we can't make those decisions based on land use. I mean, when the highway district did that, they caught a whole bunch of heat from the cities, and it just, that's not our purview. But I understand what you're talking about, and I believe the lawyer has a response.
Yeah, I understand that's the district's position. I do agree with the comment made during the work session that, I think there have been efforts in the past and maybe the cities didn't like it. I happen to know that a lot of cities wish that this commission would be a little more explicit in what you would like them to see with land uses regarding transportation demand.
Well, I can't miss an opportunity to let this one go, so I'm gonna tee this one up. I mean, you know, this has been the argument in this valley forever, you know, and people are moving here and saying, how do you let these roads get this congested? You know, well, we don't build roads in anticipation of development. We don't have the money to build roads in anticipation of development. Anyone who says, oh, we need better planning, you know, as an engineer, I'm not predisposed to like planners anyway. So of course we need better planning, but, you know, this issue, I mean, I bring up this high school thing not to just, you know, pick on it, but it came before us first. So we didn't have a chance to get into all the minutia of, I have no idea what the City of Meridian took into account. All we could do is say, look, if you want to do this, you know, here's the deal. You know, it can be mitigated with payment of, well, they don't even pay an impact fee, but I mean, there was just, I mean, there weren't a lot of levers for the highway district to pull, and that's not uncommon. So, you know, I'm interested in how we're gonna do this, but, it's gotta be, you know, a cooperative effort. I just don't know. We could create a house of cards, but it's not gonna do any good, I don't think. But Steve's dying to say something, so I'm anxious to hear what he's gonna say.
Well, something like that. Steve Price, ACHD General Counsel. Commissioners, just trying to maybe clarify some confusion and bring some focus back to the deliberations. All of this that we're presenting and in terms of this ordinance, they are factors that go into how we exact improvements as well as impact fees. When a developer comes to the highway district and has a development, whatever size, infill, whatever, the highway district has certain constitutional authority to exact improvements from the impact of, on the transportation system caused by that particular development. And we can do that through mitigation. We can do that through different types of mitigation. Improvements to the roadway, as Commissioner Woods indicated, previously we used to exact those improvements. And we had kind of a hodgepodge of roadway improvements because we would have to wait. They were only, the Constitution only requires that it be really on-site improvements or adjacent to the particular development. And that's why the impact fee program came along in 1991. And what it does is it allows a developer to pay an impact fee, and that is to pay it the developer's constitutional obligation for the impact from that person's particular development, and it's based upon different types of land uses. And by doing that, we now have a system of improvements that is more uniform and allows us to do bigger segments within the county. And so the exaction game went away except for one thing, and back in 2002, we took a case to the Idaho Supreme Court, and it related to, can ACHD, in addition to charging impact fees, can we also require additional mitigation through other improvements like sidewalks and things like that? And we won that case. And so all of the things that we're trying to do today, we're not trying to give the developer a break. We're trying to make the developer pay for the impacts caused by their development, and we're trying to provide a set of rules that allows them to do that in different scenarios. It doesn't matter necessarily what the level of service is because it is a standard that we use, but in most cases we exact sidewalk improvements and other pedestrian improvements, bicycle lanes, and we really don't have a need to measure that. It's just simply something that we can require, we can exact in addition to the impact fee. And so I just kind of wanted to bring it back that that's what we're doing today. It's an exaction game, all of these different standards. The land use agency, we can't exact standards beyond what our jurisdiction is. We're limited based upon what's in our little box. We can make comments to the land use agencies about other improvements, We can try to, for instance, pathways. We don't have jurisdiction over pathways, but there's situations where we can recommend pathways that interconnect with our sidewalks. And so staff, when they review these developments, I can assure you that they work with the developers and that they're trying to get as many improvements, pedestrian, all different, the modes of transportation out of a particular development. And frankly, we're blessed to have a development community that sees the benefit of those improvements, and we end up having some good development. So anyway, thought I'd just share that little tidbit and see if we can't answer any other questions.
Okay, thank you. I thought I saw someone else who wanted to testify.
Good evening, my name's Dave Jorgensen.
It's afternoon. It's
Good
not
afternoon.
evening yet. It's getting there, but it's
Feeling
still
like it.
just
At
afternoon.
least you're listening, thank you.
Okay.
I have a few comments to
Oh,
make.
your address, I'm
My
sorry.
name is Dave Jorgensen, address 14254 West Battenberg Drive, Boise, Idaho. When I first read this ordinance, I was opposed to it. I thought this is not fair to the development community. You're now charging more. We're already having a hard enough time as it is with affordable housing, and now we get to pay more. And how are we going to do that? I've also listened to and appreciated the comments today, and I've done a lot of pondering about the ordinance. Is this really the right thing for the highway district to implement today? And I've concluded that it's, maybe I'll use the word compromise, but it's somewhere in the middle. It does ask the development community to pay more. Not only is the development community still required to pay the main mitigation, which we've always done for, as alluded to, since the early 90s, pay an impact fee based on a 20-year plan. And not to use any different words than plan. That plan can be amended, adopted in a lot of different ways, but that isn't under the control of the development community. That's ACHD and Compass that determines those things. And then the development community is told, this is your impact fee, you pay this. And that's supposed to then mitigate over the 20-year plan. That's the system that we've been living in for quite some time. I've been here long enough to know actually what it was like before impact fees were charged. And I hope we don't go back to those days. This is at least a more fair and equitable for all landowners to implement. So it will raise the cost the developments pay. I don't know that that's right or fair, but I also recognize that the development community needs some clarity and consistency. I've been here too many times to see too much chaos in front of the commission and last minute arm wrestling that takes place about, well, will you do this? Will you pay for this? And I'm tired of it. I'm not interested in doing that anymore. And so therefore I'm doing less developments until this is determined, because I need certainty and clarity in the work that I do. Otherwise I can't move forward in my business. And so having said that, I do support this going forward at this time because it brings the clarity and consistency that we need as a development community. Yes, it'll charge us a little bit more, but it's probably also fair to all parties considered. I could add more comments. I'll leave it at that. Stand for any questions you have.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else who wishes to testify?
My name is Betty Berman Solo. I live at 1970 Canyon Arrow Way in Boise. I am opposed to adoption of this proposed amendment. I feel that it has had very limited input by Ada County residents, other than development pressure to step away from the level of service F standards. It appears to be extremely lenient towards the developer and negatively impacts the safety of resident taxpayers. I feel there should be added required mitigation for every situation that adheres to a current level of service F policy. Some states believe level of service F as it is written without shoulder hour inclusion does affect safety. I've looked at some of those states as they talk about level of service. It is not always a road widening that is needed, but other mitigation as long as a road is at a level of service F. regardless of the number of trips that it generates, if that's the existing status, I feel that there should be mitigation beyond what is currently being offered. I am asking the commission to defer a decision on this amendment until further suggestions can be considered by the public. And I would also ask if I could get kind of an idea, if level of service is no longer viable as a trip limitation or statement, what is a safety analysis? It was referred to by staff. And when does this become required? Is it accident driven? Appreciate your time.
Okay. So, Mr. Inselman, do you want to respond to the question about safety analysis?
President Baker, Commissioners, that's required today in all of our traffic impact studies, and it would continue with proposed revisions.
I'm sorry, what?
It's required today in our traffic impact studies, and what was referenced in doing an additional analysis with that shoulder hour provision was to provide a safety study based on our traffic impact study policy. So they're provided today with the traffic impact studies that are turned in.
Okay, thank you.
I mean,
Mr. Woods?
just to clarify, Gary, I mean, so, you know, a level of service F saying that that's an issue of safety is, you know, I've thought about that and saying, okay, well, if there's more cars on the road, you increase the potential for, you know, increasing the number of accidents. Just, it's the arithmetic, you know, rule, right? But I mean, that's not what the safety analysis is looking at. It's looking at the movement of pedestrians and vehicles, the movement of bikes and vehicles, and looking at conflict points and making sure that there's no, you know, safety conflict there. I guess the example that comes to mind is when we were looking at Cole and Fairview and that one access point and whether or not that was a safe turning movement to go across 2 lanes of traffic, turn it left and go out. So that's sort of an engineering professional opinion, right? With some instructions on how to do the analysis. Is that what a safety analysis is?
President Baker, Commissioner Woods, that as well as reviewing accident history and other provisions that can be made to improve that, as we do in our own projects, all of that.
That's just a part of it, that we're not just always just looking backwards and saying, oh, there's so many accidents, and it's either safe or not safe. We look at detailed movements and making sure there's no problem there too, right?
Correct.
Okay, anyone else who wants to testify?
Good evening, Mark Tate.
Afternoon.
1087.
Wants it to go.
Why am I always in the evenings when I'm here?
It's a long day.
Afternoon. 1087 East River Street, Boise, Idaho 83702. I do want to point out that you didn't hear us speaking in what was in effect an impact fee increase on us on the previous item, so that should be noted. As people have pointed out, I'm not going to beat this to death, but as you know, impact fees cover the arterial system, the arterial roadways and sidewalk plan, CIP as you dubbed it. And that is what arterials and funding are for. That's really the question here is we're talking about arterial roads. They're big community facilities. And you know, really ACHD, in my opinion, doesn't have, other than maybe some frontage improvements, an ability to exact improvements on those roads. Impact fees should cover those roads. This policy gives additional tools for ACHD to exact improvements on an arterial system. That's not, as Mr. Jorgensen said, not necessarily a benefit to the development community. It adds more tools for developers to pay more money to mitigate impacts. And specifically when roads are artificially constrained or is already at a level of service F. I would like to point out, you know, the scopes of these traffic studies, while there is a policy for it, is very arbitrary. And we've chased roads out very far, and for any development, you could chase a road out to a level of service F. So you know, if you're not gonna adopt this policy, I want to see traffic studies on every infill project, on every downtown project, and there will be level of service Fs. And I wanna see the downtown projects coming out to rural areas and mitigating traffic, because they are bringing rural people into downtown to work, and then therefore those commercial impact fees should be going out to rural areas to mitigate impacts. There's level of service F. Okay, so we're talking about it in reverse, but what I'm saying is we need consistency, and this policy gives us that it's super important. And you guys need to be consistent in requiring traffic studies and looking at mitigation. I know some of you care deeply about infill. Infill is very important, but you know, we'll do both types of development, and it makes absolutely no sense to, you know, not have some sort of mitigation. This gives those tools. I'm not actually suggesting you do that for urban projects, but if you're not going to adopt this policy, you need to be. And I mean that, because it is absolutely unfair that there's all these level of service Fs around downtown that you could absolutely run a traffic impact study out to Harrison or wherever you want to and find a level of service F and trigger all of these improvements. So you need to be doing it if you're not. And so, you know, this gives that flexibility. I think it's really important. As you know, it's an ordinance. There's 4 of you here. It needs unanimous approval, and I really, really, really think that this is a good thing for ACHD. It gives consistency and predictability to the process, which is why we're gonna support it. It's important to have that predictability and fairness basically in the process. So I implore you, I really, really think it's important to move this forward today. It's been deferred already. I think it's important that it go forward. Appreciate it. And I'd stand for questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions?
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further comments? Okay, I have a question for Mr. Price. Well, we've heard someone ask for a deferral. I know Rebecca Arnold wants to weigh in on this, and I believe Mr. Goldthorpe has some questions as well, which is very difficult for him to ask at this point in time. Notwithstanding the fact of trying to make a decision today, I think that's probably impossible. So my question is would this be considered business that needs to be taken care of before the end of the year when a new commission is going to be installed? Or is this considered, even after the first of the year, a continuation of the business at hand?
Madam President, Steve Price, ACHD General Counsel. With the change of commissioner, I mean, we have a record that with the public hearing that's still open. If you defer it, I think it would be fair that it be done before the end of the year. I suppose that the new commissioner could come and read the tape or listen to the tape, but Commissioner Woods wouldn't, if it's after the first year, wouldn't be able to participate. And much of his testimony was very valuable today. So the deferral I would recommend, if you're going to do that, would be before the end of the year.
Okay, thank you. All right, well, I'm going to go ahead unless, did you have a question?
I'm prepared to vote for it today. I had some concerns. And I'd be happy to share those. And since Commissioner Goldthorpe can't speak, I'll just take some of his speaking
happens.
I need to be somewhere by 4:00.
All
Commissioner
right,
Hanson,
well,
so-
no, it's evening according to a couple of ours. This, of course, is an Ada County problem. I mean, it's an Ada County, you guys don't have to deal with this outside of Ada County.
Well-
Because the very things that incentivize in an integrated city, they can work to address incentivizing infill and disincentivizing sprawl and the cost of sprawl. We understand this is an Ada County problem because it's separated. The issue I think really needs to be addressed. It's just, again, we're fixing a piece of it, but in fixing, when you fix something, you take the drywall down, you realize there's some other things that really need some fixing. And that's what's happened. We always take this apart. There's a lot that needs to be fixing. This whole notion of, well, why don't we extend the shoulder hour and we address the issue of, well, maybe we can use sidewalk, bike, pedestrian infrastructure as a mitigating factor, but we don't measure it. So the way we determine it is, well, we build it to engineering standards, but we don't say, just put in a road to engineering standards. We have this additional thing saying you have to meet certain level of service planning thresholds. So it really does expose the weakness of using level of service, either exclusively for automobiles or not using level of service across the board, which we should for all modes of transportation. The thing that sticks in my craw time and time again is that the frequency with which we then extract right-of-way or improvements without measuring them. Well, there's a lot of right-of-way and we keep giving it back. I really don't like that because it takes it off of the tax rolls. And so I've seen this across the valley where we've extracted right-of-way, we've extracted activities without necessarily having a measurement tool to say this is going to improve livability of that community, as well as the mobility of people, as well as the ways in which improved mobility might actually improve congestion. So, but, we'll put the drywall back on. We fixed one little aspect of this, and I'm prepared to move forward on this because I know that it's a much, much bigger issue. And like I say, this is an Ada County issue only. This is only a problem because we don't have the tools statutorily to do the kind of things that if that was in another county, the city could say, okay, here's some things we can do that affect land use and other things, and they could put together, okay, how about this? This is going to improve the cost benefit analysis for everybody in this valley that this development's going to take place in. So to the extent that this really does expose some of the weaknesses, I hope that people recognize, and I hope you, neighborhood leaders and business leaders, come back and say, let's take the drywall down again and do some pretty major remodeling, because that's really what's going to save the taxpayers in the future, the money that the costs we're imposing on them. So I'm prepared to vote for it if I hear a motion.
Did you want to make the motion? Well, before we do that, I'm going to close the public hearing. Okay, did you want to make a motion?
I kind of want to wait for Commissioner Goldberg.
Madam President, I'll make
Wow.
a motion and we'll see where we go from there. I move approval of ordinance 238, amending ACHD policy sections 7100 and 7200.
I'll second Commissioner Wood's motion.
Okay, is there any further discussion?
Yes.
Mr. Woods?
So I do believe that with our previous action on the capital improvement plan and now the potential adoption of ordinance 238, what we're doing what's required. I think we've offered opportunity to the community to come and comment. I know it's a tough issue for people to get their mind around, but I think deferring it was the right thing to allow more time for people to come and comment. It's it's a challenging thing. I'm not interested if developers come here and say, well, I'm not going to build if this passes. I mean, that doesn't sway me one way or the other.
That actually helps
And-
sometimes.
And, we're not going to stop growth either. I mean, this isn't, I think people that provide services, we're not Walmart, right? You don't get to come in and just pay for what you want and then walk out the door. We provide for the whole community. And so I hear all the time, why aren't impact fees that are generated in Eagle spent in Eagle? Well, part of the reason is people that live in Eagle don't spend their whole day in Eagle. They drive to other places, and we've got a county-wide mitigation plan to mitigate for that. So that's why things happen the way they do. This impact fee program, has its blemishes, but for the most part, it works. One of the things that we can look at is the level of service for, pedestrians, as much as I've struggled to get my mind around that. During the next iteration, if we're gonna update the CIP, if you look at the number of Hawks and PHBs that we've been putting in, there's some correlation there. And all of that isn't the responsibility of growth, but I think that there's a shared cost responsibility that makes some sense there for us as a purveyor of the public infrastructure to make sure that, we balance where that cost is spent. I mean, everybody that is here already wants everybody who's moving here to pay for everything, right? That's not gonna go away, and, candidly, I wish I could make that happen too, but it's not. And I think this is a right step in the direction, but I think there's a lot of work that has to be done again in 2020 when the CIP and maybe changes to this ordinance, come together. I think we ought to take a look at pedestrian level of service from the standpoint that it can help roll up some of these crossings and have a balanced approach to how that's paid for. So, thank you.
Any further discussion? Okay, so the motion before us is to approve ordinance 238, amending ACHD policy sections 7100 and 7200. So, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, so that passes with 4 yes votes, so thank you very much. And thank you for all who came and testified today. We really appreciate it. All right, next item on the agenda is the Gooder John subdivision. It's a waiver of policy for improvements on Homer Road and Gooder John Lane. And Don Battles will give us staff report. Do you want to take a break? Okay, before we do that, we're going to take a 5-minute recess. So you weren't here last week. Clancy Anderson wants to talk about it.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
So I'll let him have his little say right off the bat, and then we'll just go into our discussion. It's freezing in here, Stacy. It's freezing. It's like a meat locker.
I keep my coat.
I might go get mine and huddle in here.
All right, it's time for kickoff.
Yeah. So, let's, where's Mr. Hanson? Did you pass him? Let's get her done. I got a Thule being delivered. I got a Thule being delivered today. You know, the thing that goes on top of the car?
Yeah, Thule, right?
Yeah. So where's Jim?
Let's do it.
Come on.
He's out there bullshit.
I'm going to bring the commission back into session, so we'll hear a staff report from the Gooder John subdivision with Don Battles. If you could get Mr. Hanson to come in, because he's the one running this pool. Okay. So go ahead.
Madam President, Commissioners, for the record, I'm Dawn Battles, Development Services. This is a request for a waiver of improvements to Homer Road and Gooder John Lane. The applicant is requesting approval from the City of Eagle for a plat located on Homer Road and Gooder John Lane, northwest of the intersection of Linder Road and Homer Road. Gooder John is proposed as a 6-lot residential subdivision on 39 acres. The site has approximately 1,115 feet of frontage on Homer Road and approximately 1,300 feet of frontage on Gooder John Lane. Homer Road and Gooder John Lane are classified as rural local streets. The applicant is requesting a waiver from the rural street section requirements along Homer Road and Gooder John Lane. Those frontage improvement requirements include the construction of Homer Road and Gooder John Lane as half of a 30-foot wide surface, 13 feet of pavement with 2-foot wide minimum concrete ribbon on each side, 4 foot of which will be striped for non-motorized travel abutting the site. The applicant is basing their waiver request on the fact that there is 24 feet of existing pavement. The plat is only creating 4 new residential lots, and the site has over 1,000 feet of frontage along both roads. As noted in the commission memo, for developments with lot sizes of 5 acres or greater, policy requires a minimum of 24-foot wide streets with 3-foot wide gravel shoulders. If you consider the overall site acreage and the proposed number of lots, the average lot size is 6.5 acres. The existing improvements on Homer Road and Gooder John Lane exceed what is required by policy for rural streets with lots greater than 5 acres. Staff is in support and recommends a waiver of policy to widen Homer Road and Gooder John Lane to 30 feet in width due to location, large lot size, and the existing improvements. Staff recommends approval of the staff report as written. I will stand for questions.
Thank you, but if they already meet the requirements, why do they need a waiver?
They don't meet the requirements of the 30 feet width of pavement.
But you said they met the requirements already of the 24.
President Baker, with lots greater than 5 acres, they do. But in all reality, each lot is not over 5 acres, so we took the plat as a whole.
But it's 6 lots on 39 acres.
Correct.
So what are the ones that front the road? What size are they?
Let me look for a minute.
There were 4 of them, right?
Correct.
I mean, isn't the challenge that some, they're just less than 5 acres?
They're all less than 5 acres?
The 3 that front the road are less than 5 acres, correct. And those are on Homer Road.
Madam President.
Okay, Mr. Woods.
Isn't the challenge that if the rest of that open space comes in and they subdivide that in the future, now we got a whole bunch of less than 5 acre lots on a narrow road, right? There could be a subsequent action that could come in on those in that open space.
President Baker, Commissioner Woods, I'm going to let Christie answer that question.
Christy Little, Planning Review Supervisor. Madam President, Commissioner Woods, if the open space redeveloped, then there would be a new development application and additional frontage improvements could be applied at that time.
To Homer Road, even though the additional improvements do not front Homer Road?
Madam
Or
President.
additional units don't front Homer Road?
Yep. Madam President, we do have an off-site policy which is referenced in the staff report. That would also be applicable to this section of Homer Road in the future. And that could equate to additional pavement widening on this section.
Can you please just show the map again? The subdivision.
The plat map or the vicinity map?
Vicinity map. There you go.
Madam President, Commissioner Woods, you can see there is significant topography in that northwest corner of the site.
Thank you. Okay, is there anyone who wants to testify on this item?
All right, so here, Madam
Mr.
President.
Hanson?
Yeah, the question I have, these are both currently dead-end streets, correct? Little local dead-end roads.
President Baker, Commissioner Hanson, yes, Homer Road dead ends to Gooder John, and then Gooder John ends at the terminus of a cul-de-sac.
Of a cul-de-sac. So we got two little roads. The reason why I wanted us to look at this is the difference between this and the one we did earlier, which had Brookside Court. That was gonna be designated as a private road. We've already, for some reason, somebody said basically what is not much more than a driveway is gonna be a public road. Particularly the topography, we had this issue arise with another development where it looked like we were gonna assume the responsibility for the maintenance of a road that is little more than a private driveway for 6 or 7 home sites. And what I'd like to do is, my preference is to send this back, rather than extract any right-of-way from these private landowners, send it back and say, the trade-off is, we'll make this, designate these as private roads. You deal with it however you want. We're not gonna extract any right-of-way from you. You develop them and maintain them. You know, and in the future, if you wanna connect to something else, you're gonna have to come back and improve them. But I don't think it's justified in these little roads right up against the foothills with the, even our maintenance requirements based upon the grade. We have to go and in the snow time, grade the plow the steeper grades. So I think it's appropriate. This is an example, not just assume, well, it's always gonna be public and the public has to assume that cost, but to give them the option of going private, being a private development, much like the development we approved earlier this afternoon.
Ms. Little?
Madam President, Commissioner Hanson, so just for clarification, these segments of Homer Road and Gooder John Lane are already ACHD roads.
Right.
And we maintain them, and they provide access to parcels not included in this development.
Right.
So it'd be very difficult for us to ask the developer to vacate a public roadway that provides access to other parcels.
Yeah, but I'd like us to go down that road, find out if we can vacate these roads and make them private.
Mr. Price?
Madam President, Steve Price, ACHD General Counsel. Is it the developer's obligation to vacate the road that serves other properties? Is that your question?
Do we never take a public road and vacate it into a private road? I mean, so it's a permanent public obligation once we've turned it into a public road. I'd like to see that as an option, so that the property owners there have that option to, oh yeah, then they don't have to.
Commissioner Hanson, I'm a little confused as to your question. Can you restate it for me?
It's a statement.
Okay. Oh, well, yeah, okay, all right. We can't require a landowner to vacate a road, especially when it serves other people in the area.
Right, so it's not requirements to go back and provide the option as a trade-off. If you prefer, we can vacate this road, make it private, if you all agree to it. And the benefit you get, of course, is you're not obligated to, we're not extracting any right-of-way for current or future improvements. So that's I understand the assumption going forward was this is and always will be a public road. But we know the cost of maintaining every single mile of public road is pretty high and getting higher. And in those areas where landowners and developers of those lands are given that option, they may unanimously come back and say, yes, we prefer that.
So you're just saying that you want to leave it as an option in the event that they decide to do that?
Send it right back to them and say, we would like to put this on the table, to make these private roads, much like we just saw Brookside and we ought to do with others, because they
And what
only
if they say
serve
no?
a small number of private property owners.
What if they say no?
Then
we bring it back?
Then we go back, we have to determine whether it's justified, yeah. That's, I think, a reasonable approach.
Part of the issue, though, Mr. Hanson, with that Brookside was that was internal to the subdivision, whereas this is external to the subdivision. On the last one, the Brookside Lane, I believe it was called, or Brookside Drive, or whatever it was, is a public road, and it will remain a public road. So this is not the same at all, quite frankly. So, but, Commission, do you want to defer this to give the staff a chance to ask the developer if he wants to assume
I'll make that
hegemony
informal
over
motion.
of a public road?
Can we please put the proposed development up there, not just the site, vicinity of the site, put the site map up?
So, Madam President, Commissioners, just for reference, so this is Homer Road and it's existing public and maintained, and this is Gooder John Lane and it's existing public and maintained, provides access to this property up here and over here, and then what you're seeing here is just a common driveway to the existing home.
And that will not be public.
Correct.
And in terms of vacating that portion of road that services the properties to the north, the developer, and just in terms of our policy, we are, and by statute, we're prevented from eliminating their access if it's currently served by a public road.
Well, Commission, I can't see people saying, I'm going to take over a public road and provide access to somebody else by making it private. I just don't see that happening. So I'm going to make a motion that we approve the Gooder John subdivision request for approval with a waiver of policy.
Second.
Okay, is there any further discussion? Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
No,
Okay, motion passes 3-1 vote. Thank you. So the next item on our agenda is the Thomas Drive Bridge. And just to set the stage for this, we have received information from the staff regarding the events that led up to this. To date, we've not received a formal letter from the fire department regarding safety. We've not received an internal safety analysis, and they haven't explored additional funding options. I had a problem with this last week. I don't think it's to me, all it does is serve a private subdivision. And my solution was to vacate the road from Franklin south. But I'm just gonna throw it out for discussion of the commission. What do you wanna do? Do you wanna defer it while we get these safety issues resolved? Do we want to just say we're not going to build the bridge? Do we want to say we'll hold off if the people in that subdivision wish to pay for the bridge on some sort of a cost share? What do you want to do? Okay, and do we know what the costs to date are involving in the planning and design process? How much have we spent so far?
Madam President, Steve Price, ACHD General Counsel. I've just been informed that it's $25,000 to date.
We've spent $25,000 so far?
Yes.
That's insane.
That's what was in the budget.
Madam President, I just want to comment in terms of the life safety. Whatever your decision, one way or the other, because it is a public road and we do have a maintenance obligation and we do have a certain amount of liability if we have a facility that is dangerous. Afterwards, we were going to have to go ahead and have a life safety analysis done to determine whether it is safe or it isn't safe. Because now that we have knowledge, then we're now kind of into a duty phase of negligence. So,
Well, do we really, though, have knowledge?
well, we have,
Knowledge.
we do not have clarity. We have accusations from one of the property owners up there and an indication that they believe that it's unsafe. We've had some of our staff go up there and that they've also commented that they believe, without any real analysis, but they also believe that it's unsafe.
Mr. Hanson?
I have a question. We were handed some materials and we were sent some materials received materials by email. Were this all made public, part of the public record that was, because I didn't see it attached. When I went to click attached, there wasn't, these weren't attached.
It was not attached to the agenda,
Okay.
but it has been made available, I believe.
So, Madam
Mr. Woods?
President, I was not here last week when this was discussed. I do recall in the budget review that we did, seeing a line item for bridge maintenance, under maintenance, and my concern at that time, and is still my concern today, that, you know, we tend to focus our expertise and our efforts on road maintenance, and we don't build bridges, we don't design bridges. You know, those are things that we should have an outside engineering expertise to do. And so, you know, I had concerns about that at the time. Clearly, this is a interesting bridge to a select number of property owners that was conveyed in 1949, I guess, as part of a subdivision of this property. But, you know, clearly we need to, as far as I'm concerned, that the district can't take on, shouldn't take on liability of assessing a bridge for safety if that's not our day-to-day expertise. And, you know, that should be affirmed. The fire department should weigh in to confirm, you know, whatever safety's there. And this is a tremendous expense for a limited number of property owners, and maybe there's a way to approach it through an LID or some other way, but given the budget challenges that the district faces, that's it's a lot of money per capita to invest in this bridge. So that's my perspective. I'm sure there's a way. I'm sure we can't just give it back to them. Well, we wish we could, but
Well, there's also other issues involved here. It's apparently the road that the subdivision is on is unopened right-of-way, but there's a gate, a private gate that stops anybody from using it, other than these people. And now we find out we've already spent $25,000. I mean, do we want to send more good money after bad? I don't know if there's a life safety issue involved here or not. We have gotten nothing from the fire department. We've been told that they said something, but without confirmation, I don't see how we can go forward.
Well, no matter what the decision is, we will have to investigate that. In terms of the unopened right-of-way, there's a little bit of history there. Back in 2008, for the portion that's unopened, Mr. Moore tried to have that portion vacated. And the city of Boise at the time did have authority over vacations, and they denied the vacation request because of the potential development to the south, which would be adjacent to Alderman Pond number 5. And as a result of that, back then in 2008, I do believe the commission entered into a license agreement for him to install the gate or keep installed the gate. The statute does allow on an open right-of-way for, does authorize gates to be there. So I think that the gate is there lawfully through a license agreement that the then commission had agreed to do. That just to clarify that history.
That history wasn't contained in the history we were just given.
Pardon?
Sorry?
What? Mr. Hanson, what?
Madam President, that history Mr. Price just described is not contained in the.
And perhaps it's because that's different than the bridge, but, I mean, it's an issue, but.
No.
I just think it's ridiculous.
What, can you, I'm sorry. Why did the city of so the city of Boise provided a comment to us to reject that request?
Yes, back then the statute allowed the cities the authority to consent in addition to ACHD. And working with the city, they believed that the properties to the south of the homes that abut that portion of the unopened right-of-way, that it would be available for development in the future, and that they wanted to keep that road available as an option, and that the roads could take access to through Thomas Drive to Franklin.
I appreciate that. That seems absolutely preposterous. I mean, how would one gain access to Thomas Drive if you'd have to, I don't even know how that would happen. I mean, I guess one of the landowners would convey some sort of access even. I mean, that bridge isn't gonna be if there's redevelopment here, that bridge is not gonna be the bridge that serves the.
Well, oddly, Commissioner Woods, that was the argument made then, that to support the vacation is that was really not a good option for access to.
Are the parties still interested in vacation? I mean, so we don't have.
Yes, very much so.
We don't have that requirement anymore.
No, but they very much would. That's been Mr. Moore. I think he's just forgot about it. But the time, his fear was that he wanted to vacate it so that nobody could ever develop up there.
Well, I think if that vacation began right at Franklin Road on the other side of the bridge, that'd be a great idea.
Well, that's something we can explore with them.
I think that's what we should do. I think maybe that's what we should do. Everyone agree? Do we need a motion for that, or can we
But
just
to
direct staff?
defer the item and give us the chance to work with.
To defer the item and to have the vacation,
Start the process.
start the process for vacating from,
Well, to explore that,
Franklin,
you can't
so-
require it, but you can make a motion to defer it and remand it back to staff indefinitely. And we can explore that and come